Purity and impurity. That's going to be our discussion today, as well as a couple of interesting insights as it does. I think we'll be able to get to these, perhaps, I hope, that have to do with women and childbirth and that kind of thing. But I really wanted to focus today on purity and impurity as we're looking at our new parsha for the week, which is Tazria-Metzora. It's always a double portion that is read together. And it really gets into some interesting questions. It confuses a lot of people. And we want to look at this because a lot of, when it comes to purity and impurity, it's not uncommon for people to misconstrue what that means. And it leads to a lot of, wrong thinking, I think. And then in some cases, some legalism. What I mean is that most people, when they think of, I believe this is true, that when they think of purity and impurity, they somehow associate that with sin or something bad, whereas it's not really bad. It just is. It's kind of like a human condition, and it's difficult for us to understand because we often think of terms in black and white. If you're pure, then that, the English word implies free of toxins, free of malady, free of sin. You're pure. If you're impure, then that implies, there's something wrong with you. You have a stain, you have a blemish. Well, the reality is that tahor and tamei, that in Hebrew, that's not really what that means. It's actually a deeply spiritual concept that is challenging for people to understand. Also, when people study this and they don't have the sources, they don't really, and this is why, I feel like I say this all. This is why Lapid Judaism is so important, because we actually bring sources, and it's critical to have sources. So dangerous. It is so dangerous to try to study the Torah by, just reading it in English only and ignoring or not being aware of the ancient sources, because it gets people messed up. One of the ways it gets people messed up is they feel like when they are, impure at certain times, and this usually applies to women, we'll get to this in a second, that they feel like they can't attend the synagogue. They can't be around people because, they're impure. They're in a state of impurity. And so therefore, sometimes you'll see women who will stay home from shul, or they'll have had a child and they'll spend 30 days staying away from the synagogue, right? Because they believe they have to. Okay. And so, and that's where people get messed up. And because, and sometimes that leads to legalism. And there have been, I use this term loosely, Torah teachers, who teach people this kind of stuff, right? Because they don't know what they don't know. And so, and then the other issue is that in this Torah portion, we learn about the priests who are examining skin diseases. And I have heard, pastors and so forth teach about this and say, well, you see, this is the law. The law of Moses was all about health. And so they presume that in this case, this is just the priest acting as a medical doctor. So if you had a skin issue, if you had some acne or, some kind of a skin lesion, you would go to the priest, who basically in this role was acting more or less like a dermatologist. And of course, that's not true at all, because interestingly, this is the only quote unquote disease that is examined by the priest. The priest is not there checking your tonsils. Right? He's not feeling your lymph nodes to see if you have any swelling. He doesn't have a stethoscope. He's not listening to your heartbeat, checking your EKG readout. Right? The priest is not a doctor. This is not about medicine. So what's it about? And it turns out that this skin disease is a very spiritual thing. It's the only thing medically that the priest actually examines. So it has nothing to do with medicine. It has nothing to do with being a physician. As a matter of fact, there were physicians in Israel and they weren't priests. So it has nothing to do with that. This is all deeply spiritual stuff, and we're going to explain it today and try to bring down some insights. So let's talk about, just right off the bat, what does it mean to be tahor and tamei? Tahor being pure, tamei being impure. The way that I always remember that was I would say funny little rhyme as it rhymes in English. Tahor I want more, tamei no way. Okay, tahor I want more, tamei no way. So there's pure and impure. There is, and this applies to a lot of different things. But is it? Let's deal with this right away. Is this an issue of bad or good? No. Okay. At the same time, is it necessarily good to be tamei, to be impure? Well, no, but we're going to come to this in a second as to why you'd want to correct that. Okay, so let's deal with it first of all. Is it bad? Is it bad or good? Okay. No, it's not about that. Because frankly, there are things that happen to us, all of us, male and female, that are part of our natural God-given functions that make us impure. And there's nothing we can do about it. A woman's menstrual cycle is going to make her impure. That is normal. It is natural. There's nothing wrong with it. She is not, when she is impure in that during that time frame, she is not evil or wicked or an outcast or any of those kinds of things at all. There's things that happen to a man. There are functionalities that happen to him that are normal and natural, that are God-given, and is. And then there are some things that are celebrated. In fact, they're God-given commandments. For instance, a husband and wife are commanded to have intimate relationships, physically intimate relationships, and it's celebrated, and it's a joy, and it's not a necessary evil, as in certain religious settings, all of that's considered a necessary evil. So it's like, but not in Judaism. No, not at all. And yet, when that occurs, and it should occur often anyway, but the point is that when it occurs, the couple, particularly the man, enters into a state of impurity. Is that make him evil? Does it make them wrong or bad? Did they do something evil? Did they do something sinful? No. In fact, they were fulfilling a commandment. So we see that sometimes fulfilling a commandment can actually lead us to becoming impure. Another case in point of that is the red heifer. The priest, or the one who administers or slaughters the red heifer and then administers the water and so forth, he becomes impure, whereas the person who receives that same blessing becomes pure. Did he do something evil? No, he was fulfilling the word of God. Why does he become impure? Well, that's the great mystery of the offering of the red heifer, which frankly has no explanation. What about a woman who gives birth to a child? Bringing a child into the world is a function of her unique function that only a female can do. And she is, that's that, to the extent that she's able to do that. This is what God has ordained for women in general. And so it's celebrated. And in fact, to a degree, it's part of the commandments. And yet, when she gives birth, she is considered impure. Her impurity for a male is for, a shorter time period than if she gives birth to a female. The simple explanation for that is that So when it comes to this question, so why is this the case? If giving birth is a God thing, and it's a holy thing, and it's a happy thing, then what is it that brings impurity? I don't understand. But before I answer that question, let me just emphasize here: we're seeing that impurity does not equal sin. Impurity does not equal bad. Impurity does not equal evil. It's simply impure. And it's a very much a spiritual concept, one to which we don't always have clear and concise answers. But we can provide some answers. And we're going to be looking here. I'm just going to be reading here from the Kale Tumash, the introduction to Tazria, to understand this. But let me just say that with respect to the male and female child, here's the reality of giving birth. And this is one of those kind of, unfortunately, it's morbid, but it's reality, okay? The minute that you or I were born, we began to die. That's a reality. Sad, horrible reality, but this is the effect of Adam's sin and Eve's sin. And so the moment that a child is born, it is a mixture of thoughts. On the one hand, it's a great celebration that a new life has come into the world. A soul has come to earth in order to fulfill its divine mission. And yet, it's sad because from day one of birth is also the clock begins ticking to the death. And so Hava has given birth yet again to death, hence the impurity. Well, okay, Rabbi, that makes sense to me. Then why the difference between male and female? It's a good question. Is it because Judaism is sexist and chauvinistic and Jews just hate women? No, to the contrary. To the contrary. Did you notice, by the way, you may have noticed this, maybe you haven't, but if you go by the traditional, strictly traditional Orthodox Erev Shabbat Seder, talk about Friday night, did you notice that there is a blessing for the woman, ostensibly the wife, although it's not limited to wives, it could apply to any woman at the table, the Proverbs 31. Did you notice that there's no blessing for the men? There's no blessing built in intrinsically into the Erev Shabbat protocol, or I should say Seder, that is specifically for men. But there is one from antiquity for women. Now, at Lapid Judaism, we have added that to our observance, right? That's our custom. Our custom is that the women will speak a blessing over the men, usually Psalm 112, could be Psalm 1, or some other psalm of their choice. And we did that for a lot of different reasons, but not the least of which is that the ladies wanted the opportunity to bless their husbands. But I point that out because Judaism, out of both ignorance and an anti-Semitic spirit, is accused often of being chauvinistic. But isn't it interesting that we're so chauvinistic that we don't even bless ourselves at the Erev Shabbat table, but we do bless the women? Selah. But anyway, so what's the difference then, Rabbi? The answer is because when a woman gives birth to a woman, a female child, she is giving birth to a person who will give birth to death. I mean, if you really, I mean, again, I know we're looking at it as, we're just looking at it pragmatically at this moment. Babies are awesome and children are awesome, and thank God for that. And they're fun, and especially when they're, to me, the best time of a child is like between, I would say, 6 and probably 10. Like, those are the best years. But anyway, I digress. But the reality is, all kidding aside, the female is going to give birth to death. She's going to give birth to human beings who will be on their way to death. That's just a practical way of looking at it, and hence the added period of impurity for giving birth to a female child. Okay, both are celebrated, both are awesome. So we're seeing here that purity and impurity have nothing at all to do with this. Now let's deal with another issue. What's the real impetus of being pure and impure? In what way does it really matter? And the reality is that it matters only in as much as it prevents us from coming to the holy temple. That's right. Pure and impure is a deeply spiritual reality that affects us only as it pertains to coming to the holy temple. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. And here's the other thing that you and I need to know. And that is that you and I are all, according to Torah law, at this present moment, impure. Meaning that you and I, if the temple were built today, it may come down from Shemayim soon in our time. You and I could not just waltz into the temple. You say, no, I've been made pure by the atonement of Messiah Yeshua. Yeah, that's true on a very spiritual level. But in the reality of where we are now on this earth, you and I cannot just waltz into the temple right now. We could not. We would have to go through the ritual of the sprinkling of the red heifer. We would have to go through the waters of the mikveh, of course, and be purified. And of course, it's deeply spiritual. You're not going to see any impure cooties on your skin that wash off. So that's the reality. You and I are all impure. And the reason we're impure is because A, there is no temple. B, there is no sprinkling the red heifer. C, you and I have done all these things that would make us impure. And probably the easiest one of all is that raise your hand if you've been to a funeral. Raise your hand if you've been to a cemetery. You're impure. So now there's things that we do, right, in the absence of a temple to purify ourselves, like the mikveh, even ceremonial hand washing. Ceremonial hand washing is very much this spiritual ritual of removing impurity. And that all has effect, it all has power, it all has relevance. But in the grand scheme of things, as we're talking about here in Torah law, being pure and impure matters and pertains really to the temple, which is why a great many Jewish rabbis and so forth suggest that it is not proper for a Jew to ascend the Temple Mount. There's a difference of opinion in Orthodoxy about this. There's some who say you can go up to the Temple Mount. However, you have to regulate your travel up there to specific areas, okay? And you cannot go to the platform where the temple stood. You have to be outside that area, right? There's others who say can't go up there at all. The whole mountain is sanctified. And the reason we can't go up there is because we're impure. And whether there's a building there or not, it doesn't matter. It's the mountain that's holy, not the building. So there is this concept, right? Which brings us back to, what if you are a female and you're going through your time of the month? Nothing wrong with that. That's how God made you. Okay. It's nothing to be ashamed about. Or you've just had a baby. Can you come to the synagogue? Yes. Why? Because it's not the temple. And I just got through saying that we're all impure and we all show up there. Did you just catch what I just said? So there's no reason to stay home, unless you just want to. You're not really feeling that great, or you just want to take a respite or whatever. I mean, that's different, but it's not, you're not breaking Torah law by showing up. Nobody has to worry about sitting in your chair. Okay. There, you say, well, I don't want to allow anybody to contract my impurity. First of all, it doesn't matter because there's not a temple. Second of all, it doesn't matter because we're already impure anyway. Right? Now, the only exception to this is as it pertains to relationships between a husband and his wife. It is strictly forbidden by Torah law for a male, male and female, of course, for husband and wife to have intimate relationships while she is in that state of nidah. In fact, in Orthodox homes, it's pretty much commonplace for there not to be any physical contact, like a shomer negia situation, between husband and wife while she is going through her nidah. Okay, and of course, and this is I talked about shomer negia, I think during the third meal session, and people, it's often wonder, what's the big deal? A shake of the hand, a touch, who cares? But yet, let a husband and wife spend, about a week or so, not touching or not hugging or not, just complete shomer negia at home, and then watch what happens when she's finished with that time. She goes to the mikveh, and now they can touch again, and just watch the sparks fly. So if you're wondering whether or not shomer negia has validation, just think about the shomer negia that takes place between a husband and wife when that's going on. Okay. So there's that. Naturally, women will eventually, just as a side note, women will eventually reach a state in their life in which the nidah situation is no longer a part of their existence, part of their life, in which case, these issues no longer apply. So there's that, right? So looking at Tazria, so we've kind of gotten a clear picture now of what pure and impure means. It relates to the temple, hence the thumbnail of this teaching, having the temple picture on there. But I want you to understand this. I want you to understand it's deeply spiritual, and I want you to kind of course, I always want people to be set free. I say that a lot because I feel like people, the ignorance, the anti-Semitism, and the ignorance, and the ignorance, and then more ignorance. Well, anyway, I'm kind of being silly, but seriously, it just keeps people bound and keeps them fearful. And, it's just bad. And so I want you to be set free from this. I want us to understand this concept. And can I also say that you and I will never, I don't think anyway, this is my opinion, I don't think that you and I will ever fully understand or appreciate impure and impure, or pure and impure. And the reason I say that is because I think it's so deeply spiritual, that we just won't quite be able to grasp it in its entirety. So looking at this, it says, one of the comments is, the name of this parasha, Tazria, literally means she will cause to grow. Okay. Referring to this case to a mother's concept of a child in her womb. The first section of the parasha discusses the ritual defilement that a woman incurs as a result of childbirth. So this is ritual defilement that she has incurred by doing something that God frankly commands. So there again, it's not about being evil, but rather it's just a fact of life. The reality is we're humans. And so because of the fall of Adam and Eve, there is this is a reminder that our humanity cannot be perfected. Okay, this is why, by the way, this is a good reason. This topic right here. why the Messiah cannot be just a plain old human being, because he's going to be intrinsically impure at times. And how does that help us? So it says here, the first section of the parasha discusses the ritual defilement that a woman incurs at childbirth. The rest of the parasha discusses the defilement contracted by a person or garment afflicted with a condition known as zarat. Zarat is neither any disease with which we are familiar today, nor any natural disease that was ever known to humanity. So zarat is not leprosy. A lot of people mistakenly believe that. And in fact, I think in even some translations, it may even say leprosy. But it's not leprosy. The zarat, the skin affliction that is being discussed here in this parasha, is not a known or natural disease. Okay? It says it is a physical condition directly and miraculously resulting from a spiritual flaw rather than one contracted by a lack of hygiene or by exposure to any physical contagion. So this zarat has been contracted spiritually, which is one of the reasons why the person is an outcast. They're not an outcast because you cannot catch zarat by touch or what have you. You can catch it through interaction. You can catch it through being influenced by their behavior. And as will be spoken of very often in rabbinic literature, that the cause of zarat is lashon hara, which is something that you and I have to work on constantly. Not speaking lashon hara, evil speech, tattletelling, tale-bearing, true or not true. Anyway, it's a very, very, very challenging, but this type of thing leads to a spiritual disease. So it says, as we have seen, the Torah discusses two broad categories of defilement: spiritual defilement, which reduces our sensitivity to divine consciousness, and ritual defilement, which renders us forbidden to enter the precinct of the temple, okay, or to consume sacred food. Both types of defilement discussed in this parasha, that incurred by childbirth and that accompanying zarat, are forms of ritual defilement. So it says the temple and its rituals are designed to connect us with God, who is the source of all life and vitality. When we experience an encounter with death, decay, depression, mortality, or some other antithesis of life, the overwhelming confrontation with the apparent futility of life renders us temporarily incapable of participating in the life-affirming rituals of the temple and the other ancillary activities associated with it. Similarly, any nexus point between life and death, such as childbirth, forces us to focus on our mortality, thereby rendering us susceptible to pessimistic inactivity or depression until we undergo a process of purification designed to reorient us towards life, activity, and optimism. Now, that is a big old paragraph, but what it's essentially saying is that these things that make us impure are the very things that remind us or bring our attention to, or frankly reveal the fact that we have death, decay, and depression and mortality. And that cannot come into the precinct of life. This is, we talk about meat and dairy separation, which vexes a lot of people, but hear me when I'll say this yet again: meat and dairy separation is 100% forbidden by written Torah law. But Rabbi, the verse says don't boil a kid in his mother's milk. Actually, do you read Hebrew without a concordance? If the answer to that question is no, then please believe me when I tell you that is not what it says. It says in Hebrew, literally, do not bake, boil, or broil meat with dairy. That's actually what it says in Hebrew. And if you can't read Hebrew, please don't doubt me until you find somebody who can read Hebrew for you, and you can see that, okay? It's a product of written Torah law. Now, some will tell you, and I tend to agree with this, although it's not necessarily the answer, but probably the most likely answer. And that is because meat represents death, because something had to be slaughtered, and milk represents life, for obvious reasons, and therefore you do not mix death and life together. That makes a lot of sense, given the fact that there were no dairy offerings in the temple. And given the fact we're talking here about being impure is really about mixing death with life. When you become impure, you are temporarily in a state of death, or at least you're exposed to the reality of death, to the reality of your mortality, and that has no place in the sanctuary of life. Now, something else that's talked about here is depression. And the Hasidic Jews, Hasidism, really hone in on this and developed a mindset, if you will, about it, that you really cannot serve God if you're not full of joy. Now, we see this echoed in the apostolic writings, where it talks about, I mean, in the letters written by the apostles, we read things like, you know, having peace, right? That goes beyond understanding. We talk about, rejoice in all things. We read things like, whatever is good and pleasant, focus on these things. So we see this concept, this Kabbalistic concept, that if we're going to worship God, we need to do so in a state of joy. Depression detracts us from being able to come into God's presence. Why? But the question is why? Isn't depression normal? Isn't sadness normal? Well, yes. In certain instances, it's normal, such as mourning. And this is why a mourner is not supposed to come to the house of the Lord, unless under certain circumstances where it's commanded, such as certain festivals and so forth. But generally speaking, they're exempt from coming to the house of the Lord. Why are they exempt? Because they're depressed. Why are they depressed? Because they've lost a loved one. That's normal. God understands that. But what about other circumstances that make us depressed and frustrated? Why is it that God would say, I don't want you to come into my presence? The Holy Spirit will not rest upon someone who's depressed. You have to be in a state of joy. This may be why the Satan works so hard to make us frustrated and angry. The answer? Because ultimately, depression and sadness and frustration, we're almost done with our session today, okay? So I wanted you to prepare yourself, because this is not going to be comfortable to hear, okay? But if you've been around me at any length of time, you know that I try to teach us what we need to hear, not what we want to hear, right? There's 1,000 other channels you can go to get your ears tickled, and they'll tell you what you want to hear. You're here because you need to hear what you need to hear, okay? I need to hear it too. When we're depressed, when we're sad, when we're frustrated, when we're fearful, it is only a testimony that we do not really trust God. Because if we really trusted him, we would know that even in those things that should bring us depression, should bring us fear, should bring us anxiety, should bring us depression, are ultimately going to work out for our very best, because God is in control and we trust him with our whole heart, and we know that he has never let us down. This is why the Holy Spirit removes itself from us when we are depressed, because we're not having faith. Is it possible to believe in God and yet go through a difficult time? Yeah, you better believe it is. So this is the reason, because in the sanctity, in the sanctum of life, there cannot be any death. And depression is part of death because it's a loss of hope. It's a loss of trust. And our faith in God is life. End of our Aliyah today. I hope this has been inspirational and help you understand some things. We have a lot more to say on the topic. There's actually, I did not get to the quote I wanted to get to about the childbirth as it pertains to the formation of human souls and kosher eating, which is interesting. But we'll do that tomorrow. I'll lead with that tomorrow as we continue to talk about this important topic and this wonderful parashah. So God love you. Thank you so much for being here today. May you have a blessed day. Please like this video. Please share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so. That would be a blessing. And otherwise, have a great and amazing day. We'll look forward to seeing you. Bezrat Hashem, Manana.